I was 9 months pregnant, my belly tight as a drum, when my water broke in the backseat of Brandon's Chevy. Pain hit me like a sledgehammer, and I gripped the seat, gasping Brandon hospital now. He just clenched the wheel, his knuckles white, ignoring me. Myra? His mother twisted around from the front, her eyes sharp. "Quit the drama, Heather," she snapped. Then Brandon slammed on the brakes, yanked open my door, and dragged me out. "You're ruining us," he roared, shoving me onto the rain-soaked road. I hit the gravel, hard pain shooting through me. Their taillights faded into the storm, leaving me screaming alone. Have you faced family betrayal like this? Comment below. Heather Sullivan lay sprawled on the Ohio highway's shoulder, rain pounding her face like 1,000 needles. Another contraction ripped through her, forcing a cry that the wind swallowed whole. Her soaked dress clung to her swollen belly, and she pressed trembling hands against it, whispering, "Kayla will make it." The name she'd chosen for her daughter felt like a lifeline, the only thing keeping her from breaking. Brandon's face twisted with rage as he shoved her, flashed in her mind. Worse was Myra's cold silence, her lips curled in disdain, not even glancing back as they sped off. The night had started with a brittle kind of hope. They were headed to a family reunion in some nowhere town outside Columbus, Myra's idea, even though the radio blared storm warnings. Heather had felt Kayla kicking all day, a flutter that made her smile despite the tension in the car. She'd tried to stay quiet, sensing the storm brewing between Brandon and Myra long before the rain hit. They'd been at each other's throats for weeks, ever since Tiffany, Brandon's sister, got tangled in some shady deal that drained their savings. Heather didn't know the details. Brandon never told her anything anymore, but she heard enough in their shouted arguments to know it was bad. "Pay Tiffany back or we're done!" Myra had hissed in the car, her voice low but venomous. Brandon shot back, "I'm handling it." His eyes flicked to Heather in the rearview mirror, hard and accusing, like she was the problem. She'd clutched her belly, feeling the first twinge of pain, and said, "I'm not feeling right. We need a hospital." Brandon snorted. "You're fine, always making a scene." Myra chimed in. "She's just attention-seeking, Brandon. Ignore her." The pain grew sharper, and Heather's voice broke as she begged again. "Please, it's the baby." That's when she felt the warm rush between her legs, her water breaking, soaking the seat. "Brandon, stop," she screamed. He didn't. Instead, he veered onto the shoulder tires, screeching. "You're slowing us down!" he bellowed, leaping out. He wrenched her door open, grabbed her arm, and pulled her from the car. Heather stumbled, pleading, "Don't do this." But his hands were rough, shoving her hard. She fell, scraping her knees on the gravel, the rain stinging her skin. Myra sat still, her face a mask, saying nothing. Heather's breath came in ragged gasps as she lay there, the highway stretching dark and empty. Her phone was in her purse, still in the car, along with any chance of calling for help. Another contraction hit, and she curled into herself, sobbing. "Kayla, stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. Lightning cracked, illuminating the road for a moment, showing no one, nothing, just her alone, fighting for 2 lives. She forced herself to her knees, hands slipping in the mud. Every movement was agony, but giving up wasn't an option. Kayla was all she had left. Brandon's betrayal burned in her chest, hotter than the pain. Myra's silence was worse, a confirmation that Heather was nothing to them. She thought of Tiffany, the sister who always seemed to pull Brandon into trouble. Was this about her? The money Heather didn't know, but the questions fueled her resolve. She'd survive this, not for them, but for her daughter. The wind whipped her hair, and rain blurred her vision, but Heather crawled forward, one hand on her belly, the other clawing at the ground. Her knees bled, her body screamed, but she kept moving. "Somebody, please," she rasped, though no one could hear. The storm was relentless thunder shaking the ground, but Heather's will was stronger. She pictured Kayla's face, the tiny life depending on her. Each inch she gained was a defiance of Brandon's cruelty, Myra's indifference. Hours seemed to pass. though it might have been minutes. Heather's strength was fading, her breaths shallow. She collapsed again, face pressed to the wet gravel, and for a moment, despair crept in. What if no one came? What if Kayla didn't make it? But then she heard it, a faint rumble, not thunder but an engine. Headlights pierced the rain, growing closer. Heather lifted her head, heart pounding. Was it help, or just another cruel twist? She pushed herself up, waving weakly, her voice a broken cry. "Help me." Heather Sullivan's arm trembled as she waved at the approaching headlights, her voice a raw croak swallowed by the Ohio storm. Rain plastered her hair to her face, and another contraction doubled her over her knees, sinking into the mud. The truck slowed its tires, crunching gravel, and a figure leaned out. "You okay?" a gruff voice called. Heather shook her head, gasping. "My baby, please!" The man jumped out, his boots splashing, and knelt beside her. "Name's Todd Ramsey. Hang on, I got you." His strong arms lifted her, and Heather clung to him, pain blurring her vision, as he carried her to the truck's warmth. Inside, the cab smelled of coffee and leather, a faint comfort against the chaos. Todd gunned the engine, glancing at her. "How far along?" he asked, voice steady. 9 months, Heather panted, clutching her belly. "My water broke. They left me." Todd's jaw tightened, but he didn't pry, just drove through the downpour. "My wife Cynthia, she's a retired nurse. She'll know what to do." Heather nodded, too weak to speak her mind, replaying Brandon's hands shoving her out, Myra's icy stare. Why, what had she done to deserve this? The truck jolted over a pothole, and Heather cried out, the contractions coming faster. Todd swore under his breath, pushing the gas. "We're close," he said, his calm anchoring her panic. Minutes later, they pulled into a gravel driveway, a modest house glowing faintly through the rain. Todd carried her inside, shouting, "Sin emergency." A woman with gray-streaked hair rushed forward, her eyes sharp but kind. "I'm Cynthia. Let's get her to the garage. It's clean and we've got space." Heather barely registered the move, her world narrowing to pain and fear for Kayla. The garage was cold, lit by a single bulb, but Cynthia worked fast, spreading blankets on a workbench. "Lie down, honey," she said, her hands steady as she checked Heather's pulse. "How often are the contractions?" Heather gasped, every 2 minutes. Cynthia's face tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "You're close. We can do this." Todd hovered nearby, fetching towels and boiling water, his worry hidden behind quick movements. Heather gripped Cynthia's hand, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "I can't lose her," she whispered. Cynthia squeezed back. "You won't. Focus on me." The pain was a tidal wave, each contraction threatening to pull Heather under. She screamed, pushing with every ounce of strength, Cynthia's voice guiding her. "You're doing great, Heather. One more." Heather's body shook, her vision spotting, but she gave everything. A sharp cry pierced the air, a tiny gasping sound. Cynthia lifted a red-faced baby umbilical cord, still pulsing. "It's a girl," she said, smiling, but her eyes darted to the infant's chest. Kayla's breaths were shallow, her skin pale. "She's struggling," Cynthia said, voice low. "We need to keep her warm." Heather reached for her daughter, exhaustion warring with fear. Kayla's tiny fingers curled around hers, and Heather's heart clenched. "Stay with me, baby," she whispered, tears falling. Cynthia wrapped Kayla in a blanket, rubbing her gently, but the baby's wheezes grew weaker. "She needs oxygen," Cynthia said, glancing at Todd. "Storms knocked out the phones. We gotta find a signal." Todd nodded, grabbing his coat. "I'll try the main road. Stay with them." He disappeared into the rain, leaving Heather and Cynthia in the dim garage. As Cynthia worked to stabilize Kayla, Heather's mind churned, the betrayal cutting fresh. Brandon's voice echoed. "You're slowing us down." Myra's silence was louder, her disdain a knife. And Tiffany, what was her role? Heather had overheard enough to know Tiffany's deal had bled them dry. Was that why Brandon snapped, Did Myra push him to ditch her? The question swirled, fueling a fire in her chest. She'd trusted Brandon loved him through his temper, his secrets. They'd met in college, shared cheap pizza and big dreams, but the past year had changed him. He grew distant, quick to anger, always whispering with Myra or Tiffany. Heather had thought it was stress, not betrayal. Kayla's weak cry pulled Heather back. She stroked her daughter's cheek, her own breaths shaky. "I'm here, Kayla," she said, voice cracking. Cynthia's hands moved with practiced care, but her face was grim. "She's fighting, but we're running out of time," she said. Heather's stomach dropped. She pictured Brandon's face. Myra's smirk and rage flared. They thought she'd break, that she'd disappear. But she wouldn't, not for them, not now. Kayla needed her, and that was enough. The garage door rattled in the wind, and Heather's eyes flicked to it, hoping for Todd's return. Cynthia adjusted the blanket around Kayla, her voice soft. "You're strong, Heather. Most wouldn't survive what you did." Heather swallowed, her throat raw. "I didn't have a choice." But she did, she realized. She could have given up, let the storm win. Instead, she'd crawled, screamed, fought. For Kayla, for herself. Memories of the car ride flooded back. Myra's words. "Tiffany's mess is your fault, Brandon." His reply, "I'll fix it." Heather hadn't understood then, but now she wondered. Was Tiffany's deal a scam? Did Brandon blame her for their debts? The thought made her sick, but it also sharpened her resolve. She'd find out, make them face what they'd done. Kayla's breathing hitched, and Heather's heart raced. "Please hold on," she whispered, her hand trembling over her daughter's tiny form. Cynthia checked Kayla's pulse, her frown deepening. "We need that hospital," she said, urgency creeping into her voice. Heather nodded, fear clawing at her. She looked at the garage door again, the storm's howl unrelenting. Todd was out there fighting for them, but time was slipping away, and Kayla's life hung in the balance. Heather tightened her grip on her daughter, willing her to fight, just as she was fighting. The rain battered the roof, and Heather braced herself, knowing the worst was far from over. Heather Sullivan's eyes fluttered open to the sterile hum of a hospital room, the storm's roar now a distant echo. Her body ached, every muscle screaming from the ordeal on the highway. A soft beeping drew her gaze to a crib beside her bed, where Kayla lay, tiny chest rising under a tangle of tubes. Relief flooded Heather, but it was fleeting. Kayla's breaths were steady, but her pale skin told a fragile story. A nurse adjusted the monitors, her voice gentle. "She's a fighter, but she needs time." Heather knotted her throat, too raw to speak, her hand reaching for her daughter's tiny fingers. The hospital bed creaked as Heather shifted, wincing. Flashes of the night haunted her Brandon's hands, shoving her into the rain. Myra's cold stare, the mud under her knees. She'd survived, but at what cost? Todd Ramsey's truck had been her lifeline, his voice cutting through the storm. He'd found a passing motorist with a working radio calling for an ambulance, just as Heather's strength gave out. Cynthia Ramsey's hands, steady in the garage, had brought Kayla into the world. Now, in the hospital's fluorescent glow, Heather felt the weight of it all: betrayal, pain, and a mother's desperate hope. A doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter's stabilizing, but we're monitoring her breathing. You need rest, too. Your body's been through hell." Heather forced a nod, but rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mind churned with questions. Why had Brandon turned on her? What was Myra's role? And Tiffany, her name kept surfacing, tied to the money fights that had poisoned the car ride. Heather's fingers tightened around the bed rail, anger simmering beneath her exhaustion. The door swung open, and a woman strode in, her heels clicking on the tile. Tiffany Carter's sharp eyes locked onto Heather, her lips a thin line. Heather stiffened, recognizing Brandon's sister from family photos, though they'd barely met. Tiffany's presence felt like a storm of its own, charged and dangerous. "We need to talk." Tiffany said, her voice low, glancing at the nurse until she left. Heather's pulse quickened. "What do you want?" She rasped, her voice weak but defiant. Tiffany pulled a chair close, her gaze flicking to Kayla's crib. "You deserve the truth," she said, leaning in. "Brandon and Myra screwed you over, screwed us all." Heather's breath caught. Tiffany's words came fast, laced with bitterness. "They've been skimming money from the family trust for years, funneling it into my deals. I thought it was legit, but they were hiding it from you. When you got pregnant, Myra decided you were a liability. She told Brandon to ditch you to protect their secret." The words hit Heather like a punch, each one sharper than the last. "A liability," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tiffany nodded, her jaw tight. "Myra said you'd ask too many questions, maybe even lawyer up. Brandon went along with it, spineless bastard." That night they saw their chance. The storm, the fight, you in labor. They thought you wouldn't make it. Heather's vision blurred, tears burning. She saw Brandon's rage, Myra's smirk, and now it made sense. They hadn't just abandoned her, they'd gambled on her death. "Why tell me now?" Heather asked, her voice shaking with fury. Tiffany's eyes dropped, guilt flashing. "I didn't know they'd go this far," she said. "I found out after, when Brandon called Myra, bragging you were gone. I'm done covering for them." Heather's hands clenched the blanket, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream to find Brandon and make him pay, but Kayla's soft wheeze pulled her back. Her daughter needed her alive and strong. Tiffany stood pacing. "I've got proof, bank records, emails. I'll back you up, Heather, but you gotta act fast. They're already spinning lies saying you ran off." Heather's mind raced. Lies to who? The family, the cops? She thought of Kayla, so fragile, and rage hardened into resolve. "They won't get away with this," she said, her voice low, steady. Tiffany nodded, a glint of respect in her eyes. "Good. I'll get you the documents. You decide what's next." The door opened again, and Todd Ramsey stepped in, his flannel shirt damp from the rain. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing between Heather and Tiffany. Heather managed a weak nod, still reeling. Cynthia followed, carrying a coffee cup, her face softening at Kayla's crib. "She's holding on," Cynthia said, touching Heather's shoulder. "You both are." Their kindness grounded Heather, a stark contrast to the betrayal eating at her heart. Tiffany slipped out, promising to return, leaving Heather with Todd and Cynthia. She told them everything: Brandon's cruelty, Myra's scheming, Tiffany's bombshell. Todd's fists clenched, his voice rough. "They're monsters. You need a plan, Heather." Cynthia's eyes were fierce. "Whatever you do, we're here. Kayla needs her mom fighting." Heather looked at her daughter, tubes snaking from her tiny body, and felt a fire ignite. She'd been a victim on that highway, but no more. The hospital room felt smaller, the air heavy with what she'd learned. Heather's body was weak, her stitches aching, but her mind was sharp. She thought of the trust, the money Brandon and Myra stole. Had they planned to cut her out from the start? She remembered their whispers, the way Myra always dismissed her as weak. Weak, Heather's jaw tightened. She'd crawled through a storm, given birth in a garage, kept Kayla alive. Weak was the last thing she was. Todd and Cynthia stayed their presence, a quiet strength. "You don't have to decide now," Cynthia said, but Heather shook her head. "I'm done running," she said. "They wanted me gone, but I'm still here, and I'm going to make them pay." The words felt like a vow carved into her soul. She didn't know how yet confront them, expose them, maybe even take back what was hers. But she'd find a way. Kayla stirred, her tiny hand twitching, and Heather's heart ached. She leaned closer, whispering, "We'll fight together, baby." The monitors beeped steadily, a fragile promise. Outside, the storm had eased, but Heather knew her battle was just beginning. She'd need proof, allies, strength she wasn't sure she had. But for Kayla, she'd find it. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed, and Heather's eyes burned with purpose, her next move already forming. Heather Sullivan wiped flour from her hands, the warm scent of fresh-baked bread filling her tiny Ohio bakery. The shop, a cozy storefront with checkered curtains, had become a haven in the 6 months since the hospital. Kayla, now a rosy-cheeked 1-year-old, giggled in a playpen by the counter, her laughter a balm to Heather's scars. The townsfolk loved her cinnamon rolls, but more than that, they loved her story, whispered tales of a woman who'd crawled through a storm to save her child. Heather smiled at a customer, but her heart raced. Tonight, at the town's summer fair, she'd face Brandon and Myra armed with the truth. The bakery's success had been a surprise born from sleepless nights and a need to rebuild. Todd and Cynthia Ramsey had helped her start Todd hauling flour sacks, Cynthia spreading the word. Heather poured her pain into every recipe, turning betrayal into something sweet. But the past wasn't gone. Tiffany Carter had delivered a manila envelope weeks ago, stuffed with bank records and emails proof Brandon and Myra had siphoned thousands from the family trust. They thought you'd never find out, Tiffany had said, her voice bitter. Use this, Heather. Make them pay. Heather's hands had shaken as she read each page, fueling a fire she'd barely contained. The fairgrounds buzzed with life strings of lights twinkling above food stalls and a makeshift stage. Heather adjusted Kayla on her hip, scanning the crowd. Stacy Miller, a local mom who'd become a friend, squeezed her arm. "You've got this," Stacy said, her eyes fierce. "The whole town's behind you." Heather nodded, her throat tight. She spotted Todd and Cynthia near the stage, their presence steadying her. Then she saw them, Brandon in a pressed shirt, chatting with locals. Myra at his side, her smile polished but sharp. They acted like nothing had happened, like Heather hadn't nearly died on that highway. Tiffany slipped through the crowd, her face set. "Ready?" she asked, handing Heather a microphone. Heather's stomach churned, but Kayla's weight in her arms grounded her. She stepped onto the stage, the crowd quieting. "Most of you know me." Heather began, her voice steady, despite her pounding heart. "You know I almost lost my daughter Kayla a year ago. But you don't know why." The air grew thick, eyes fixed on her. Brandon's smile faltered, Myra's hand tightening on his arm. "I was 9 months pregnant when my husband, Brandon Carter, threw me out of his car in a storm." Heather said, her words cutting through the murmurs. His mother, Myra Pierce, watched and did nothing. "They left me to die thinking it'd hide their secret." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heather held up the envelope, her voice rising. "They stole from our family trust, thousands funneled into scams run by Brandon's sister, Tiffany. They thought I'd be too weak to fight back." She locked eyes with Brandon, his face pale. "You were wrong." Tiffany stepped forward, her voice clear. "I was part of it, and I'm ashamed," she said, facing the crowd. "But I won't let them lie anymore. Heather's telling the truth. Here's the proof." She held up copies of the bank records, passing them to stunned onlookers. Myra's composure cracked, her eyes darting to Brandon. "This is nonsense," she snapped, but her voice wavered. Brandon stepped back, shaking his head, but the crowd's mood had shifted. Whispers turned to glares, neighbors turning away from the Carters. Stacy climbed onto the stage, her voice booming. "Heather's one of us," she said. "She built that bakery from nothing, raised Kayla alone while these two lied and stole. Who do you believe cheers?" Erupted a wave of support that hit Heather like a lifeline. She looked at Kayla, her daughter's eyes bright, and felt a surge of strength. She hadn't just survived, she'd won. Brandon's face twisted, and he lunged toward the stage. "You're lying!" he shouted, but Todd blocked him, his bulk unyielding. "Back off, Carter," Todd growled. Myra grabbed Brandon's arm, hissing, "Not here." They retreated, the crowd parting like a sea, their whispers a chorus of judgment. Heather's knees shook, but she stood tall, Kayla in her arms, Tiffany and Stacy at her side. The fair resumed, but the air had changed. People stopped by Heather's stall, offering hugs, words of support. "We're with you," an older woman said, tears in her eyes. Heather nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Cynthia hugged her, whispering, "You did it." Todd clapped her shoulder, his grin wide. Proud of you, kid. Heather managed to smile, but her mind was racing. Brandon and Myra wouldn't let this go. She'd humiliated them and they'd fight back. As the night wound down, Heather sat at her stall, Kayla dozing against her chest. Stacy handed her a coffee, her voice soft. You're a hero, you know that. Heather shook her head. Just a mom? She said, but Stacy's smile said otherwise. Tiffany lingered nearby her face, unreadable. They'll come for you, she warned. Myra's vicious when cornered. Heather's jaw tightened. She'd expected this, but the thought of Myra near Kayla made her blood run cold. The bakery had given Heather a new start, but tonight had changed everything. She'd exposed the truth, reclaimed her voice, but the fight wasn't over. Brandon's glare. Myra's hiss, they'd haunt her dreams. She thought of the trust, the money they'd stolen. Could she take it back? Should she? Kayla stirred and Heather kissed her forehead, her resolve hardening. She'd built a life here with people who believed in her. Whatever came next, she'd face it. Stacy helped pack up the stall, the fairgrounds, emptying under a starlit sky. Todd and Cynthia joined them, their laughter easing the tension. You shook this town up, Todd said, ruffling Kayla's hair. Heather managed a laugh, but her eyes scanned the shadows, half expecting Brandon's face. The community's support was a shield, but Myra's threat loomed. Heather hugged Kayla closer, her heart a mix of triumph and fear. She'd won tonight, but tomorrow was another battle. Heather Sullivan stood behind the counter of her Ohio bakery, the morning sun spilling through the window, warming the checkered floor. Kayla, now a toddling 2-year-old, chased crumbs with a giggle, her curls bouncing. The shop buzzed with regulars, their chatter mingling with the clink of coffee mugs. Heather's cinnamon rolls were a town favorite, but her story surviving a storm, a betrayal, had made her a quiet hero. She smiled at a customer, but her heart carried a weight, a shadow from the night she'd nearly lost everything. 2 years had passed since the highway, since Brandon Carter's hands shoved her into the rain, since Myra Pierce's silence cut deeper than the cold. The summer fair, where Heather exposed their theft from the family trust, had changed the town. Brandon vanished soon after, rumors swirling he'd fled to avoid shame. Myra stayed, her polished facade crumbling as neighbors shunned her. Heather had rebuilt her bakery, a testament to grit, but the past lingered like a bruise. The bell above the door jingled, and Heather's breath caught. Myra stood there, her face thinner, eyes hollow. I want to see my granddaughter, she said, voice low, almost pleading. Heather's grip tightened on the counter, memories flashing Myra's sneer, her silence as Brandon threw her out. You don't get to just walk in here, Heather said, her voice sharp. Kayla toddled over, clutching Heather's leg, and Myra's eyes softened, a flicker of something human. Please, Heather, she whispered. I'm sorry. Heather's chest burned. Sorry. For what? Watching her suffer, plotting to erase her, she wanted to scream, to slam the door, but Kayla's curious gaze stopped her. Her daughter deserved more than hate. Not today, Heather said, firm but softer. We'll talk, but on my terms. Myra nodded, defeated, and left the bell's jingle echoing. Heather scooped Kayla up, kissing her forehead, her resolve wavering. Could she let Myra in even a little? The bakery had become Heather's anchor, its success a shield against the pain. Todd and Cynthia Ramsey were family now, Todd fixing shelves, Cynthia babysitting Kayla. Stacy Miller ever loyal organized community events at the shop, drawing crowds. Tiffany Carter, once complicit, had turned ally, sending legal papers to reclaim the stolen trust funds. You're owed this, Tiffany had said, her guilt raw. Heather hadn't decided yet, suing felt like reopening wounds, but the option gave her power. Life wasn't perfect. Nightmares of the highway still woke Heather, Brandon's face haunting her sleep. She'd heard he was in Chicago dodging debts. Part of her feared he'd return, but the town's support dulled that fear. Stacy's words at the fair, "You're one of us" rang true. Heather wasn't alone anymore. She'd built a home, a small rental with a garden where Kayla played its warmth, a stark contrast to the cold car rides with Brandon. A week after Myra's visit, Heather agreed to meet at a park, Kayla's tiny hand in hers. Myra sat on a bench, no longer the icy matriarch, just a woman worn by regret. "I was wrong," Myra said, eyes on Kayla, who chased a butterfly. "I let greed blind me. I pushed Brandon too far." Heather's jaw clenched. "You watched him throw me out," she said, voice low. "You wanted me gone." Myra flinched, tears welling. "I did, and I hate myself for it." The words landed heavy, stirring a storm in Heather. She'd imagined this moment screaming, cursing, but now seeing Myra broken, she felt only pity. Kayla ran back, offering a dandelion, and Myra's face lit up a grandmother's smile. Heather's heart twisted. "You can see her," she said finally, "but only if I'm here, and Brandon stays away." Myra nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a step for Kayla's sake. Back at the bakery, Heather's days grew fuller. The shop hosted baking classes, kids' parties, even a book club Stacy started. Cynthia taught Kayla to knead dough. Todd built a sandbox out back. Tiffany visited, less guarded now, sharing updates on the trust case. "We're close to winning," she said, a spark in her eyes. Heather nodded, feeling the weight of justice, but also its cost. She wanted peace, not vengeance. One evening as the sun set, Heather locked the shop, Kayla dozing in her arms. The town square glowed with string lights, a reminder of the fair that had changed everything. She thought of Brandon, Myra, the trust ghosts of a life she'd outgrown. Kayla stirred, mumbling "Mama," and Heather smiled, her heart full. She'd faced betrayal, clawed through a storm, and built something real. The bakery's sign creaked above Heather's haven, a promise kept. Stacy waved from across the square, planning another event. Todd and Cynthia's truck pulled up, their laughter spilling out. Heather walked home. Kayla's warmth against her chest, the stars bright overhead. Myra's face lingered in her mind, a reminder of battles won and those still to come. But for now, Heather was home, surrounded by people who stayed. She kissed Kayla's head, whispering, "We're enough." The future was hers, and no one could take that away.